Hello coaches and welcome to this edition of Give and Go. My name's David Newbury, I'm the e-learning coordinator for United Soccer Coaches and I'm joined by my colleague Ian Barker. Hello Ian.
Hello David, a pleasure to be here as always.
Ian, we're joined by a special guest today, Sean Holmes, who is the head coach of the Roosevelt High School in Des Moines and is also a Region 2 Midwest coach and has coached extensively in Division 1 NCAA with Drake University. So welcome, Sean.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Excellent, Sean. So let's look at this activity. This is called a phase of play activity. And we're looking at specifically the sequence of the red team who are in the attacking or that are attacking the large goal. So the Reds are heading in this direction, and we have an 8 versus 6 situation with a keeper. So the Reds have 8 players, as you can count them here, 2 fullbacks, one that's hidden underneath the verbiage. We also have 4 midfield players, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we, sorry, that's and 4. And then we also have 2 strikers. So we have 3 lines of our attacking team. The coach is standing behind the goals, and the whites are attacking these 3 small goals that are set up on the halfway line. And in this example, the coach is restarting every play. So, Sean, let's talk about some of the methods you might see on this particular sequence.
Well, we're as always, we're going to emphasize possession. What we're trying to do is get our team, the red team, to move the whites from side to side to create space to play into.
And what I would look at now is when I use a phase of play activity, so we have these counter goals, is we're typically working through 2/3 of the field. So in this case, with the red team, I'm working in the midfield zone and transitioning into the attacking zone. Manipulate the numbers. You want to make sure you have at least 2 lines of your team. So as David indicated, we do have the back group, a midfield group, and a striking group, and that's fine. You can use 3 lines, but make sure you always have at least 2 lines. And so the red is our focus, but as with any decent session, we've created meaningful counterattack options for the white team who are not our focus, but they'll be able to counterattack off of this activity before we restart the second phase.
Thanks, Ian. And this second scenario, we actually are passing the ball directly from the coach into the central midfield position. So in the first sequence, we pass wide to a fullback. This time we're playing directly into the midfield and to a midfield player that is coming back towards the ball. That midfield player is then spreading the ball into a wide position. So let's have a look at this, Sean, and see what we think we would introduce for the coaches in terms of methodology on sequence 2.
Well, I think one of the big challenges is to make any training session as realistic as possible. A couple of things I look for. Number one, our players have to be able to communicate. I think that's a problem with a lot of young guys. They're busy doing things, but they're not really talking to each other. Number 2, keeping the team shape. I think when we start from a coach, that sometimes players tend to be sort of reactive rather than proactive. And then we've got to be prepared as a coach to stop and to recreate pictures so we can organize and get our shape correct.
Thank you, Sean. And Ian, this activity here, we see 2 of the central midfield players moving forward as the ball is played forward into the central midfield player that is coming back towards the ball. Can you speak about why we would have those runs forward as that sequence is occurring, and obviously any other observations on this sequence?
Sure. So one of the things I think as we start to get more sophisticated with players, perhaps 11 and 12, and certainly older players, is the notion of complementary movement. So as this player advances, maybe there is space or a defensive response that allows this player to check too. Here on this flank, we see a player check down, we see a player check up. So this could be lateral, this could be across the park, or it could certainly be in more of a north-south type movement. And then what's nicely shown here is this player has driven high, maybe to engage the defenders, take them deep, and then has checked back at the appropriate moment into a pocket of space that allows them to carry at the player. So complementary movement, however you explain that to your players based on their age and their cognitive ability to grasp what you're saying and how you can show them. But this notion of push and pull, especially in the attacking sequences, is critical.
Thank you, both of you. So here we go, last sequence, and again, a different scenario. This time the coach is playing a deep, long ball to a high-lying wide midfield player across the park, this to the left-hand side, and the red team has worked on a sequence of an interchange of short passes between the striker, an attacking central midfield player, and then look to make a penetrating pass in behind the defense of the white, for the wide right player to get forward and hopefully either get a shot in or a cross. Sean, let's have a look at this final example and anything here that you'd like to share with the coaches.
Well, I think there is a couple of things that come to mind. The 2 or the 7 who's out here on the right wing needs to have the discipline to keep the space, to keep it wide for when we eventually find him. And then what we need to do is develop a rhythm of play so that we now start to play 1 and 2 touch, playing the way we face, rather than trying to switch in 8 passes or 17 touches. I find lots of young players want to receive the ball, take time, then make the decision rather than get a quick rhythm of play. So we're able to play out wide, left to our, so when the switch eventually comes, that we've done it, we've been able to move the white team towards where the ball was on one side and then switch to where the space is on the other side.
Thanks, Sean. Ian, anything to add on this last sequence?
Yeah, so for the coaches, highly game-like activity. The white team, who are not our focus, are in a game-like activity. They have counter-attack goals. They have their defensive shape, their midfield shape. So game-like activities, you're going to get buy-in from your players. What I would probably suggest to coaches here is you might have your pattern, and let's say that pattern is wide, in, back, and across. That's your pattern. And what you want to do is you want to have them execute the pattern 2 or 3 times, and you're going to demand it. And to achieve that, you may need to have less white players, but that's the pattern. And then obviously you would do the pattern perhaps out the other side. And then as you layer in more patterns, then the players can choose from that series of options that you've given them. But sometimes you have to go through those patterns 2 or 3 times to just get them established. They have to feel it. They have to experience the pattern that you've laid out for them, whatever that pattern may be.
And not only do the numbers of the white team is important for us when we set this activity up, Ian, but also how we've set them up in terms of positions. One thing we notice here is we don't have any white players playing high, which will allow us, if we want to set up the pattern, into these wide fullback positions. Any thoughts on how we set up the defense in order to get out the theme?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important in this particular setup that we have wide defenders, fullbacks, who can apply pressure and make it consequential on the areas we want to attack through. So you manipulate the numbers of the opponents to help you get the session going, but then you also manipulate their starting positions. So in the case here, we have the 2 central midfielders, which allows space for the Reds to check back into because there aren't corresponding wide midfield defenders. But then you have the fullbacks, because we want to engage fullbacks. We want our wingers to have that experience. So everything is manipulated by the coach to increase the realism.
And Sean, last comment here regarding how you would then progress this phase of play activity into a more game-like activity.
Well, before we get to that, I think something I do with my teams a lot of the time is sort of an activated shadow play, where you might, in those first stages when you're working on pattern play, have the defenders play at 50% to encourage some level of success with the players. And then eventually we've got to get to numbers even so that we make it as game-like as possible.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thanks very much. That's all we have time for this activity today. Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Sean, for your time. And thank you, coaches, for joining this edition of Give and Go Live.